Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's Mohammed again. So, right now, we're going to continue with section six. We're going to be actually comparing both of the servers, DC1 and DC2, even though DC1 is actually a global catalog server. So, let me just go ahead and take a look. Here are my two servers. This is server one. Let me just open tools and open the Active Directory users and computers console. And I'm going to do the same thing on my second server. But look at this under domain controls. Like two, one is a GC and one is a DC, and this one is actually connected to server one, as you see. And if I minimize this and I go to my second server and I go to tools and open Active Directory users and computers, I will actually see it's connected to server two and the same information on both servers, but one of them is a GC and the other one is a DC, a global catalog and just an actual domain controller. Now, what's the difference between them? A global catalog server will have information about all the domains in the forest. Let's say we have a parent domain as udemy.local, and let's say we have a child domain, let's say support.udemy.local. That belongs to the same tree. It knows about all the domains in a single forest, where a domain controller only knows about that specific domain. So that's like a big difference. The global catalog also processes user logons and query searches, where domain controller does not actually do that. So per a physical location, I would always recommend at least two global catalog servers, right? So I want to switch the second server to become an actual global catalog server. There's two ways where I could actually do that. I could do it from either server over here. So if I check over here, I could just go to the properties of the server under the domain controllers OU, and I click on NTDS settings, new technology directory service, and I can put a check mark in the box for global catalog. Then okay, then okay. Now if I refresh, see that they're both GCs, and this is connected to server one. That's one way of doing so. Another way is if I go to tools and I open Active Directory sites and services, right? To manage my actual locations, even though I only have, one location over here. And I take a look and I see server two, I go to the properties and I would have to put a check mark in global catalog. That's like another way of doing so. So I already did that. Server one, as you see, knows about server two that it's a global catalog. What about server two? Does it know about itself? Let's see, because replication happens once per an hour. So this is connected to server two. Let me refresh, and it actually knows. Another way of doing this, instead of going to that actual server, I go back to server one. Watch this. This is connected to the instance of server one. If I change domain controller, I should see server two. Now, the one that you're connecting from will always say unavailable. That's fine. Ignore that. So server two, and I click on OK. So now from server one, I'm connected to the instance of server two. So I could see replication. And over here, they're both global catalog servers. So right now, both of them are actually GCs, right? So that was a difference. One of them was a DC and the other one was actually a GC. So that's a good thing that we have at least two global catalog servers in the same physical location, which is actually called a what? Site, right? So that's one thing. Another thing, I want to actually go ahead and check another thing, which is actually the DNS. Look, server one has DNS. See that? I have DNS. So if I go to tools and I open DNS, I could see the actual zone. In other words, I only have one name server, which means all my clients can only be pointing to this server for DNS. This is not good. I want to have multiple DNS servers, at least two DNS servers. That's what I want to actually have. So if I minimize this, I want to make sure there's also DNS on my second server. So I'm going to go to the second server and install DNS. Watch this. Manage, add roles and features, and I'm going to load DNS on the server here. There you go. Next, and install. We're going to be covering DNS in more details, but for now, I'm just trying to look at the differences between GC1 and GC2. So the second server does not actually have DNS, right? So I want to go ahead and make sure both of them are actually DNS servers. So my clients can be pointing to at least two name servers, two servers for resolving names. And my first server can only be pointing to itself right now, and the second server is only pointing to the first server. That's not a good thing. What I'm trying to say is this. So if I go back, let me minimize this, and I check my actual configuration, and I go to my actual network settings, just to show you that server 2 is pointing to server 1 for DNS. So let me go to the properties and IP, and look, it's pointing to server 1. I don't have a backup. And if I go to server 1, all right, if I go to server 1 and check the network settings over here, let me just take a look. So you actually can see that. Go to the properties. It might actually be pointing to its loopback, which is 127.0.0.1. It's the same thing as actually pointing to the same server itself. So I'm going to actually go ahead and change this to itself, 223, which is the same thing. If I did this or not, it'll be the same, just to be on the clear. So let me go back to server 2 and see the role if it's installed or not. Hopefully it's finished. There you go. It's actually in the process of actually getting there. But don't be expecting to see the zone on server 2. We only have one name server, so I have to do something special. If I want the zone to replicate to server 2, since DC1 and DC2 are hosting the same domain, I could store the zone in Active Directory. Then the zone will get replicated to server 2. And we'll be talking about that more. I just want to go ahead and make sure both servers are actually running DNS. So that's what I want to actually do over here. So let's give it a few more seconds, and this should actually be finished. And then I'll open DNS and you'll see, oh, the zone is not there. So what should I do next? Yes, we have to store the zone in Active Directory. As I said, we'll be covering DNS in more details. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and make sure both servers are actually identical in terms of DNS, because I like to have at least two name servers, at least two DNS servers. So my clients can be pointing to two, and one server can be pointing to at least two DNS servers. So that's the best approach of dealing with something like this. See, everything I'm doing here is statically, but it could be done through DHCP since we just have it in an actual lab simulation. So if I go back to server one, I want to show you a tool over here, which is server one under sites and services. If I have something on server one, I could actually replicate and force replication from server one to server two, right? I mean, replication actually occurs once per an hour. There's actually a service that I could actually restart. If I do that, I'll be kicking out my users off the network. So it's not something that you would actually do during, I would say, production time, right? I would do it after hours, but I want to try and make sure this actually syncs from one to another. So if I right click over here, I could say replicate now from one to two. If something changed on two and I want to force replication, I could just replicate now. This replicates from two to one. I could also show you the command line itself, how it actually works. For now, I'm not going to do this. I want to just go back to server two and see if DNS is finished installing. So this actually should finish installing in a moment. As I said, don't be expecting to see the zone on actually server 2 right now because I still did not store the zone in Active Directory. It looks like it's almost finishing up. This is actually a good sign. So let's take a look. Let me just go back from one to another so we could see. And if I check my DNS server, I do have it open over here. If I check only one name server, what I need to do is the properties of the zone, and I need to actually store the zone in Active Directory. So in other words, it gets synced to the other domain controller. So I will have two copies of the zone. So this is what I need to do so it gets synced to the other server. But I want to show you that it's not actually there. All right. This is still installing. So I could actually close this. And even though if I close it, nothing will happen. I mean, let me just close it. And let me just go back to tools and DNS. See, now I have DNS in the list. So if I expand, right, and go to forward lookup zone, there's no way I'll ever actually see it. So what I have to do is I have to go back to server one, store the zone in Active Directory, which means in the database of AD, which means whatever happens on DC1 happens on DC2. Click OK. Yes. And I'll be talking about this, but I want to change this to secure only, which means whoever's actually on my domain will actually get a copy of that zone. And I'm going to click OK. It may take some time. I could restart the service over here just to force it. This is not something I would do during production time, right? Let me go back to server two and see right now if the zone is there, all right? No, let me restart the service here. Replication happens once every hour, so keep that in mind. There you go. Look, now I have two name servers. I have two DNS servers hosting the same actual zone. This is perfect. What does that mean? This means I could go to the server. This is what I would do in a real environment, and I will be pointing to myself also, right? 192.168, because my server is also a DNS server, so I'm going to make it 129, right? So I have two DNSs now. And then I would go to my first server, watch this, and go to the network settings, properties, and also 129. But look what I need to do over here. I'm going to go advanced, DNS, and make sure 129 is the first one. So if I restart this computer, it could be pointing to a DNS server that is up and running. So that's how you would actually do it. The preferred is a DNS that should always be running. Alternate is another server. Then I'm going to click OK, then OK. So if I restart right now, look how fast it's going to be. Let me just show you. Even though this is server one, by default, it was pointing to itself. So when I restart, it shuts down the DNS service. So when it tries to turn on, it tries to start the DNS server service and at the same time to process the logon itself for that name resolution for udemy.local. But for now it's pointing to server two. Server two is up and running. So I could go ahead and resolve it immediately. So this will not take long. When it reaches applying computer settings, not even a minute or two, and I should be there. And the same thing will happen with server two. So I'm just trying it on server one over here. So of course, during production time, you don't restart actual servers, right? You don't want to get your phone like ringing like crazy. Nobody's able to log on. And you'll see why, because we're going to be discussing the FISMO roles and see how that actually works with us. So let's just take a look and see that when I reach the logon screen, when it starts doing like applying computer settings, it will not take long to do so because there's a valid DNS server. You'll see right now. So this will not take long, right? So let's give it a few seconds and see. Normally it would take 5 minutes because it would be pointing to itself. Now it's pointing to a DNS server, which is server two as a preferred, as a primary, and it'll be able to resolve the name and I'll be able to reach the logon screen quicker. You see that? Right? So this is actually good. That's what I wanted to show you. So both of my servers are global catalogs and both of my servers are DNS servers. That's what I wanted to cover in the first part, lecture one, part of actually section six. So we'll come back and see how we could actually manage replication. So we'll see you guys in a moment. All right, guys, later then. And so what we're going to do in this lecture, we're going to manage replication between both of the actual global catalog servers, which are both of the domain controllers themselves. So look what we're going to do over here. I'm going to go back to server one. Let me just log on. The password. So remember, the protocol that is used to verify the actual authentication, it's actually called Kerberos, right? The Kerberos server itself, which is my actual domain controller. So what I want to show you is when I open DNS, remember before when I opened the TCP folder, there was only one GC. Now I have two GCs, one for server one, one for server two as GC, right? So this is actually a good sign too. All right, what does that mean? Well, let's take a look. First of all, which console do I have to be in? Tools, Active Directory, Sites and Services manages replication between all the domain controllers. Then I'm going to actually open the same thing on the other server. I could do it from one server. I'll do it from the graphical interface on this server. Then on server one, I'll actually do it from the command line. What does that mean? Take a look at this. So when I click here, I can see the partner, which is server two. Changes that happen on two, I could right click and just force replication, and this will force replication from two to one. If changes were done on one and I want to force replication two, I could just right click and choose replicate now. Right? But take a look at this. When I double click this, I could take a look and see the actual, who is the actual server. And I could look at the schedule once per an hour. I could even customize this. How often do I want replication? Right. So that's one thing. That's what I could also do. What I could also do is this. If I open services, there's an actual service that is called Active Directory Domain Services. If I restart that, that also forces replication, but you'll be kicking out users off. So if I restart, look at all these different services that it depends on. Look, all this is for replication, DNS, and all that Kerberos, right? And I'm going to click yes. This will trigger a replication too. So that's another way to force replication. Now, what does that actually mean? Let me make a change and see how this actually works for us. Hopefully, it doesn't replicate right away. So what I'm going to do is let me go to server one. Watch this. And let me open tools and Active Directory users and computers. I want to make a little actual change. All right. Look at this. I'm going to create an actual organizational unit, an actual department for testing. So I'm going to click. I know you're going to be covering this. Let's call this test one. All right. And click OK. This is actually on server one. If I want to check and see if it's synced to server two, I could connect to server two from here and I could see it's not there. So this is a good sign. So what I could do is I could go back to my second server and force replication from where? From one to two. So if I right click and do replicate, see, I have to open the one I want to replicate to, and this replicates from one to two and replicate now. So now I just force replication from one to two. So what I could do is also from here, because this is actually the instance of server two, this time when I refresh it, I could check from here. I could see it's actually there. So this is actually a good thing as you see, right? So I did force replication. Get force replication also from the command line. Watch this. I'm going to do it actually from server one. So if I open the command prompt, watch this. And the command for that is actually called rep admin. So I'm going to type rep admin space slash question mark, ask for help, replication administrator. Lots of commands. All right. So this is how it's actually done. At least it tells me how I could actually force replication. What I could do is I could do a simple command over here. Just say rep admin, right? And space slash sync all. Force replication. There you go. That's how I could force replication from one server to another, right? So that's actually doing it from the actual command line, I would say so. So that's how you could manage and maintain replication. Remember, it happens once per an hour. I could use sites and services, or I could use the actual command line to make sure both of my domain controllers are actually up to date when it comes up to objects, resources, organizational units, and all of that. And remember, there's a service which is called Active Directory Domain Services, which is right over here, right? And if I double click it, I mean, I could see the service name, which is NTDS. I could actually do this from the command line. So if I open the command line also, watch this, I could do the following. Let me just change the colors to green, right? And maybe the font a little bit more 28 is fine. So I could say net stop, all right, NTDS, and it tells me which services. I could say yes, go ahead and stop these services. Then I could do net start NTDS, or I could use PowerShell to restart the service. I mean, anything that I do in the graphical, I could actually do it in command line. So now the service is actually being stopped. So then I could do net start NTDS, right? That's the name of the service. That's how I could start Active Directory domain services right now. So both of my domain controls are synced, they're up to date, and that's how you could actually manage replication either through Active Directory sites and services, or it could be done actually through the command line as we see, right? So let's just keep that in mind. That's this right over here, which is managing replication. Our next lecture is going to be talking about the FISM roles. This is actually very, very interesting. So we'll see you guys in a moment. All right, then. Okay, then. Bye, guys.